When we assess the effectiveness of a process of learning innovation, quantitative indicators such as participation, activity output, final result, and teaching assessment questionnaire are fundamental. But the process of learning innovation is constantly evolving and integrates different areas. It is therefore necessary to provide more depth to the quantitative data collected by including a qualitative assessment. To interpret the dynamics in greater details throughout the course, it is also important that the monitoring plan starts at the beginning of a course and follow it for its entire length. But what are the qualitative indicators that can help us understand what is working within our course and what is not? The first thing to do is to observe the class, to monitor the activities and the response coming from the students. Do we have to constantly ask for participation, or are students truly engaged? Are the various phases of the activities clear? Is there any downtime that could be feared? Especially in small classes, it's helpful to create some informal occasions for students to share opinions and feelings, perhaps at the end of the lesson, to gather feedback that can allow us to identify any difficulties or doubts. To voice doubts that might be left unaddressed, it is crucial to include some formal feedback collection opportunities through, for example, one or more anonymous questionnaire that require minimum effort on the part of students, but that are very useful in identifying small corrections that can be implemented in the next part of the course. Let's try to understand, however, what topics are worth gathering feedback on. The effort required by the educational experimentation in general and within the course timeline. The perception of usefulness students have of the activities, the quality of the feedback the educator gives to the students with regard to the single activity, any doubts on the assessment criteria. But be careful, because it's important throughout the course to correctly identify which elements might require explicit opinions from students. Following a request for feedback, it is useful to show responsibility for what emerged by communicating the new methods that have been implemented or confirming the decision made at the beginning of the course. This is a good opportunity to rework the classroom agreement and refocus the meaning of the experimentation. But what about when the course is over? The final assessment of any teaching experiment has 5 different objectives. First of all, it's important to understand what worked and what didn't in relation to the various areas: organizational, educational, communicative and technological. Another important point is to collect information to formalize and refine the model if it is to be used the following year. Another goal is to evaluate the effort required by the teacher or the team of teachers and to focus on what can be reiterated. In the same way, the effort required from students should also be assessed to understand whether to reassign certain activities or remodel the entire course. Lastly, another interesting aspect is related to the students and the achievement of transversal skills. To achieve these goals, one first tool is an end-of-the-course questionnaire that, compared to the evaluation questionnaires applied by the institution, explicitly centers on innovative education and its multiple facets. An important thing to initially investigate is the perception of usefulness students have of the single activities and of the entire program, obviously in relation to the activities that the teacher designer has planned at the beginning of the course and their specific objectives. Another element to investigate is the challenges students have faced during the course, whether cognitive or organizational. This allows, during a second iteration of the course, to deploy supporting corrective actions that reduce the time required by these elements, so that it can be dedicated to more important aspects. Another interesting source is the perception of utility of the feedback and the perception of utility of the interaction between students, whether they are informal and structured or part of more complex and defined group work. A last area of interest is the development of transversal competencies, such as problem-solving abilities, communicating ideas or projects, public presentation, autonomous organization of tasks, choosing from different sources, working in groups, etc. For all or most of the elements we decided to investigate, it might be interesting to give students the possibility to provide details through open questions, in case they wanted to further develop certain topics. After the final questionnaire, it is advisable to organize some focus groups with students to deepen any critical points that have emerged from the questionnaire or the assessment throughout the course. The focus group allows us to investigate areas that are hard to bring to the surface in other ways, such as, for example, the perception of the level of integration of the innovative learning activities in the course, the modification of students' habits and approach to the course, and any positive effects that were not taken into consideration before. Where possible, it would be appropriate that the focus group is directed by someone outside of the class dynamics, so as to ensure the students' freedom of expression. In case that's not possible, the teacher can direct it, obviously setting up open and transparent communication and ensuring the freedom of expression of students. Finally, one last important aspect that should be investigated is the perceived quality of the teaching and learning experience on the teacher's side and the identification of the activities, roles and dynamics in which they have felt more comfortable. In this perspective, it can be useful to devote some time to an individual final review or a meeting of the teachers involved in the program to reread organically which elements have emerged in quantitative and qualitative terms, integrating them in their experimentation. In this way, it is easier to identify areas of sustainability, developing a higher awareness of the dynamics that have been activated, and formalize the suggested model. Let's sum up. How can we understand if a course is successful? We need to investigate the quality of the learning experience, both from the perspective of the student and the teacher. Obviously, in relation to the intended learning outcome identified by teachers at the beginning of the program and connected to the innovative activities. The monitoring plan must start at the beginning of the course and continue throughout its duration and after, and it must involve a quantitative analysis enriched by a qualitative one.